Hey everybody, it's JJ and we're back again for another Asus graphics card stream. So this is going to be a stream number 2, although I don't know if maybe last week's was that stream 0 and this is stream episode number 1. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what Jake's thoughts are here in a little bit when he goes ahead and jumps in. But as always, thanks everybody for joining us. We've actually got a cool number of things to be able to dive into, including some cool announcements, not only from NVIDIA side in terms of course the latest game ready driver, but of course actually a partner announcement for those that are interested in water cooling. And then we've got some more information we're going to dive into a little bit better understanding of all things, I think NVIDIA Reflex, which is a pretty cool technology that's now been out for about almost 2 years, a little bit longer if you actually talk about some of the specialized modes that have been available within the NVIDIA control panel. And we're also going to, of course, take a look at the PCDIY Builder Spotlight, where we've got actually a really cool system from Mr. Matt Lee, which showcases a really cool kind of TUF Gaming setup with one of our Asus 40 series based graphics cards. And then, of course, as always, your guys' questions and comments. So I see we've got Jake. Jake's joining us here on the stream. How's it doing, man? How's Thursday treating you? Hey, Jake, I think we're, let's make sure you're unmuted there. I think you should be okay now.
Okay, I think this is better. Now I'm having a better Thursday. Now I can actually talk. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the second stream. As JJ mentioned, whether this is kind of stream 1 or, stream 2, but the second stream either way. So as he mentioned, we're going to kind of go over some of the news today, and then we're going to do a little bit more discussion about NVIDIA Reflex after we discuss just some kind of the updates first. So stick around. I think that'll actually be a topic people will be more excited about than they give it credit for if they've not really looked into it yet.
Yeah, and I think, it's also going to be a really interesting topic because a lot of the times, especially within our PCDIY group, which if you guys are not part of, make sure to go ahead and join us. It's linked in the description, especially if you're checking us out on Facebook or on YouTube. If you're on Twitter, make sure to go ahead and just check us out on our social feeds, and you can probably find the link to the Asus PCDIY group. But a common question we see from a lot of gamers is, how do I improve my overall gaming experience, right? How can I improve the overall fluidity? And there's a lot of different things that attribute to the overall kind of what we call system latency. And so I think the cool thing about talking about NVIDIA Reflex is hopefully it helps to provide you a little bit of a deeper understanding at what really affects your overall experience and how it's not just really about, let's say, frame rate, right? Frame rate gets talked about a lot, but really latency as a whole is really the measurement of how responsive and really the experience you're going to have with the system. But let's go ahead and see who we have joining us here on the stream. Fantastic. We got Sneff, the one, the only, the Canadian master builder and modder from up north. Happy to have you here, man. Thanks so much. My dog is doing good. I'm coming to this stream technically on my day off, but you know what? I'm here for you guys. So let's make it work. Modoc's taking a little bit of a nap, but thank you for checking in on us. Let's see who else we have joining us. We've got somebody over on Facebook giving us a little bit of a hello. We've got, somebody sending good wishes from YouTube. My corgi sends well wishes to your pup as well. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. That's very, very nice of you. And looks like we got some love. Somebody calling out just Jake.
Yeah,
just Jake.
I'm being recognized.
I think that works. And yeah, again, somebody's asking us, not on YouTube. Yes, we are currently simulcasting out to our Asus graphics card YouTube channel, our Asus Twitter graphics card Twitter feed, as well as our PCDIY group. So Jake, why don't you go ahead and just let them know about those Asus social channels for Asus graphics? Because if you guys are not aware, we of course have a wide range of social accounts for Asus North America in general, including Asus and ROG. But we have recently launched, essentially from the beginning of this year, Asus graphics specific social channels.
Absolutely. And as JJ mentioned, these are graphics channels, so it's going to be dedicated purely to everything kind of GPU, graphics card, and the tech related to it. And some stuff that branches out into the connected tech. We'll discuss that during Reflex and how that involves more than just the GPU, but that's the idea behind it. As he mentioned, everybody wants to get more out of their system, and there are a lot of features that are being discussed and talked about, but may not always be super present if you're not like deep in the community and kind of looking for some of these talks and videos and announcements and stuff that come up. So part of this is going to be making sure you can get the most out of it. I know JJ's talked at some point about potentially doing a deep dive into GPU Tweak 3 and helping you guys understand more about how to utilize that tech. Free FPS, who doesn't love that? And then for the Reflex side and some of the software and features of that nature that may not by itself improve your FPS, but can definitely improve the gameplay and just the enjoyment of utilizing the system on a day-to-day basis. So we're going to kind of cover a broad range here over time.
Yeah. So it looks like Timmy was the one and the only PC Works, one of, again, an amazing builder and modder out there in the PCDIY community, giving you a little bit of a shout out there, Jake. So why don't we go ahead and kick things off? What do we got first and foremost?
So as usual, we're going to start with just kind of the basic software updates, making sure everyone's kind of keeping their GPUs up to speed. Regarding this, there's a new driver out from NVIDIA, and this one is kind of geared towards the new RTX 4000 series GPU laptop launch, but it does include some additional like features along with it. It's not just for the GPU models in the laptops. And I know before the stream, JJ was already hyped because we've got some Company of Heroes 3 updates.
Oh yeah, I'm so juiced, right? I think it's finally launching this month. So this is, for me, guys, maybe one of the most anticipated games for me in the last 5 years. You know, there's still over, I think, 400 active players that are playing Company Heroes right now. And I'm really, really excited about what Relic's doing. Of course, they delayed the game originally to be able to, of course, do some additional engine improvements and some enhancements. And they've been doing a lot of kind of community dialogue and kind of back and forth. And so I'm really, really excited about this launch. So we have the game ready driver so that once it comes out, you can drop into it and enjoy some awesome RTS gameplay experience. So if you guys are into RTS, and you guys are not aware about Company Heroes, make sure to check it out.
Definitely. I think it's a series that's kind of slept on in the community. It's got its fan base, but it doesn't get nearly the love it deserves. We've also got Hello Neighbor 2, which I'm not sure how many people are familiar with that series. It came out, was kind of a huge hit when it first launched and took a kind of a unique gameplay, but the sequel to that is probably going to be coming out on February 17th. And then we've got Perish, which will be coming out soon as well, I believe. And then this one's already out, but may appeal to a lot of people. World of Warcraft is actually going to support NVIDIA Reflex with this driver update as well. And for anyone who plays World of Warcraft or plays similarly competitive games, this is where Reflex may actually start to make a difference for some people.
Yeah. And in addition to that, well, you know, we don't focus on necessarily laptops on this stream. This is PC DIY centric based items. As Jake noted right here, one of the big parts of this actual driver is the formal enabling and essentially support for 40 series based notebooks. And of course, as you guys know, we're really kind of the leader in the notebook gaming space. So if you guys are interested, of course, we've got an entire array of lineup of ROG based laptops and TUF Gaming laptops that now are going to be featuring the latest generation 40 series product. And you're going to finally be able to get some really cool technologies like DLSS in there and a lot of the other things that we're talking about. So if you guys are interested in that, make sure to go ahead and also check out our social channels. You can also check out ROG Pulse for some kind of more deep dive information regarding kind of our 40 series of laptops. Now, one other thing that I did actually also want to go ahead and touch on is that on occasion, what you do sometimes see in terms of these driver updates is additional validation for actually displays. So Jake, I'm not sure if you know, but G-Sync validation actually is a continually ongoing process. So there's actually panels that can actually be initially not G-Sync validated, and then at a later stage actually receive G-Sync validation after it goes through the G-Sync labs. And so this actually gets formalized within the driver so that it makes sure to have a kind of a more optimal experience when you go about enabling that functionality within the actual display properties. And so for this specific driver, you actually have two new updates that do enable G-Sync compatibility. So it would be for the ROG Strix XG32AQ. This is a great monitor, 1440p, fast IPS, 175 hertz. This is actually a recently launched model, $529, but I think this is a really great price point and a nice big size. So if you're somebody that wants to kind of step up from the 27-inch, maybe you've got something like a 165 1080p, this is a really nice option to be able to jump into a bold, bright, fast monitor. It's going to be immersive, great for not only competitive, but also for kind of maybe more single player, or a wider range of based experiences when you talk about gaming. And now you have that G-Sync compatibility enabled by the driver. Another model is also going to be this one, the XG27AQV, and that one similar is also going to be, I actually just posted about this one, right? In our PCDIY group, but it's a 1440p, and this is going to be a curved display, 170 hertz refresh rate. Interesting thing on this one, though, is a little bit different from the norm. Again, we try to focus generally on graphics here, but when it comes to panels, this is interesting because this is going to be a fast IPS, but it's going to be curved. So traditionally, most curved monitors you see on the market are generally V8, not fast IPS. And so being a fast IPS generally also means you're going to get a little bit lower pixel response. And we'll be talking about pixel response when we actually talk about NVIDIA Reflex, because that's just part of one of the things that actually affects total system latency, is going to be what is called the display chain. So there's different chains that you have within your system that ultimately all affect the latency. We're going to be talking about that in a little while. But that's another cool thing that you may or may not be aware of when you do update your graphics card driver, is that it may go ahead and enable G-Sync monitor support. And if you're ever wondering, you can always go to NVIDIA's website, go to G-Sync compatible monitors, and they have a database which you can actually filter by manufacturer. So you can select Asus, and you'll see all of the Asus monitors that do have G-Sync validation. All right. I think that should probably cover us for the most part, I think, on that, on the driver update, right?
Yep. That covers basically everything. You kind of saw from the notes and from what JJ and I mentioned that it was largely geared towards the laptop side, but it did include some of the game updates and some increased functionality. So moving on, we do have...
Sorry, I did want to forget one other item there too, is that for some people that might have maybe heard about maybe the clock speed issue that might have came up for NVIDIA that was relating to Discord. So if you had Discord active on your NVIDIA enabled system, you might have saw actually a reduction in terms of the GPU clock. This actually driver also essentially mitigates it, resolves that bug. So I know a lot of probably gamers out there, they probably use Discord. I don't run Discord on my personal system. I run it on my secondary system, but if that was maybe something that you had, then again, maybe you noticed it, maybe you didn't, as far as for the performance, but this driver does resolve that issue. And it also, for some creators out there, you may or may not be running the game ready driver, or you may be running the studio driver. I'd love to see right now from who's checking us out on the stream. Are you using the studio driver, or are you using the game ready driver? And that's already going to kind of give us a little bit of an inclination. Are you probably a creator, or are you probably a gamer? But even under the game ready driver, it does also resolve an issue with Adobe Bridge, which a Bridge is much more commonly used if maybe you're like a Lightroom user or Photoshop user, things along those lines, right? And you guys can always kind of check out that information if you're interested. If you go into the fixed notes, you can get that information. And there's also always, I talked about this in last stream, but if you guys always want to learn more, you can always go to the release notes. So release notes is one of the best pieces of information out there to give you a lot of information regarding actually what's going on with the driver, not only in terms of issues, but maybe, let's say, known issues. So known issues, you can actually see right here. Maybe in a known issue is toggling HDR on and off in games causes stability issues when a non-native resolution is used. So that's interesting. So maybe you have like a 4K monitor, but you decided to run HDR, but like at 1440p, at like 2560 by 1440. You might think that maybe it's an issue with your display, or maybe your graphic card is going bad or something else. But this is always an interesting thing, is that you can go through and you can check and see if maybe the issue that you're running into is listed as a known bug. All right. Okay. Well, I think that covers us for the drivers. What do we got next?
Awesome. So we've got a little bit of partner news. Nothing super exciting for probably most people with the first one, but still worth mentioning. NVIDIA will have their GTC conference March 20th through the 23rd with a keynote on the 21st. Every once in a while, some of these keynotes will have information that might be a little bit more relevant to others, or give you a glimpse into kind of some of the future either designs or like products that may come out. So it's always worth at least kind of keeping an eye out for the release notes, the keynote when that comes out. And then
Yeah,
as
there's
JJ
a lot
showing,
of
this
cool
will give you,
stuff that actually, like, I like sometimes just like trying to find out a little bit of information there, because I think it's kind of interesting to let you see the depth and the performance of what the GPU allows for. So you know, you can sometimes find out about new applications that are using, of course, GPUs for processing, right, for different forms of acceleration, right. And you know, it's interesting to see kind of the breadth and depth of where you see GPUs being present, especially, of course, from NVIDIA's, of course, tight integration with so many different industries and so many different verticals in terms of research and development and whatnot. So yeah, definitely, you guys can check it out. I'll go ahead and drop a link in the chat if you guys are interested. And also, looks like, let's see who we got there. Justin lets us know he's using the game ready driver. So Justin, I would say, is probably a gamer, not a creator. For instance, for me, I got two different systems. On my system that I do a lot of photography and a little bit of my editing, I actually use the studio driver. And then on my gaming PC, of course, I use the game ready driver. All right, what else do we got going on, Jake?
So we've got one thing that might appeal to the water cooling crew. There's been some discussion around this, especially given that the 4000 series does not feature the rear memory, but for those who, whether for aesthetic reasons or the potential for a little bit extra cooling, BitsPower has actually released an active backplate for their Strix and TUF RTX 4090 series blocks. So, and for some people,
cool
maybe
looking
just
design,
having
man. I really like the look of that block.
Absolutely. They've definitely done a good job with the design on everything. And for some, just having the extra ports at the end, that might be a benefit. So just some quick news for you guys. Anyone into water cooling, definitely something worth checking out. And for me, I've
feels
always
to me
been
like
big on
that's going to be a block that if you really like RGB lighting, just because you got so much clarity within the block, right? Some blocks you sometimes see a little bit maybe kind of more accent lines that are on there, right? That have a little bit more of kind of a presented ID design. Here, it's almost like, I think the coolant, right, or the the color of the liquid that you're going to have present within your your loop, and then the RGB lighting are really kind of what's taking the frontal focus right there. So if you kind of maybe run like into a tiered configuration of some type, that could be really, really cool. Definitely also, I think, brighter or kind of bolder themed looking builds, right? If you're going to be going, white, this is also probably going to work really well because, again, it's just so reflective. But pretty cool. See, Snef right here is giving us a little bit of some feedback here. Looks very clean, fit perfectly with an all distro build. Yeah, I think, he nailed it right there. Definitely would make sense to integrate there within a distro. Yeah, a lot of those parallel lines. I'm always torn as far as the number of parallel lines that I'd like to see in the system.
Of course, Snef would pick up on the Waterblock and more opportunities to show off coolant flow and everything.
Yes, for sure. Yeah. And if you guys haven't checked out, make sure you guys, if you're not following, make sure to follow Snef. Check out his Instagram, check out his Facebook, man. Again, one of the absolute best builders and modders in the game. Some stunning absolute builds and some amazing custom stuff too. The man does a lot of his own custom chassis now, his own custom distros, and brings an attention to detail that is rarely seen amongst a lot of the builds that are out there. But some very cool stuff. So a cool little update for you guys. Do we have a link for that one, Jake, on the BitsPower?
No, we don't have a link. It was just kind of announced. But let's see if...
Why don't you go ahead and go to the next part? Let me see if I can find a link for that, and you can jump into the next portion right there and see if I can find a link for us.
It's just stay tuned for more info. So that should be launching soon. When it does, we'll probably have a link to it.
Sounds good. Hopefully in the not too distant future, we should hopefully see it maybe before the end of Q1. Usually most of the time, you usually get to see availability for these items fairly quickly after the launch announcement, but it's always a little bit more kind of on the variable side, right?
Yeah, usually within the first month or so after a product's been announced is kind of when you start getting availability for things of that nature from the cooling teams. Okay. So next up, not going to discuss this very much because we kind of went over in the last stream. But
sorry, I found the picture. I had to show it right there. Just that's with the RGB. So definitely, it's a very, very RGB friendly card there.
Yes.
All right. So you're saying you got sales and promos. What kind of sales and promos we got going on right now?
So we'll just kind of briefly go over it. We discussed this more for the last stream. Definitely be checking these out each week. But we do have GPU sales and promos going on, mostly around the 3070 down to the 3060 and like 1650, 1660 series. But we've got quite a few promos going on that. So still not too late to pick up that Valentine's Valentine's Day gift, hint, hint. But that's just a brief recap. Strix, TUF, Dual Series, which we'll actually be discussing more in a little bit about the differences between those. But definitely worth checking out your local e-tailers and everything to see if the cells in stock are still available.
Yeah, and like always too, just keep in mind too that when we're talking about purchasing, ideally you'll want to try to always make sure that you're purchasing, especially if we're talking about Newegg or Amazon, which have essentially third-party marketplaces, that you want to purchase first party. And so first party would mean that when you bring up the site, you want to make sure that it actually lists shipped and sold by Amazon, or Newegg, it would be shipped and sold by Newegg. We get sometimes people occasionally maybe in the group, they'll reach out, and while generally we don't usually allow for pricing related kind of discussions there, people might ask about whether this is like a legitimate listing or something like that, right? Always just check ship and sold. It should be by that first party. If you notice it's maybe sold but shipped by Amazon, right, then you can see actually large changes, and probably the biggest change would be the pricing structure, and that's usually because maybe they're importing it or they're reselling it or something along those lines. But when we're working with directly our channel partners like Newegg and Amazon from the first party, generally they're going to be in alignment with our MSRP pricing guidance, right? And of course you can also take a look at other channel partners, where you can always go to the where to buy on our Asus page to see actually all the listed e-tailers that might be available for your product, which may include Best Buy Online, could be B&H, it could be Adorama, could be, of course, the Asus store, could be a number of different outlets. Okay. All right. What else do we got going on, Jake?
Well, before we get into a builder spotlight, something that, or actually we'll do builder spotlight first, and then we'll discuss some of the other tech before we get into a bit more of a deep dive on Reflex. So we're going to highlight a couple things for the builder spotlight this week.
Okay.
You guys have probably seen some of Mr. Matt Lee's work already before. I know that JJ's featured some of it, and it's very frequently prevalent in the group, given how high quality the work is.
Yeah, definitely. Mr. Matt is a fantastic builder. If you guys are not following him, definitely make sure to go ahead and check him out on Instagram. I'm going to go ahead and drop his Instagram right now, but definitely an amazing builder and creator that you guys can check out. And he does a lot of Asus related builds. So.
Yeah, definitely plenty of Asus content. I love just some of the shots that you get with his work and content as well. This is, for me, probably one of my favorite shots out of this, because it shows a very underrated angle. Like when this sits on your desk, this is going to be one of the angles that you see frequently, but usually you're getting pictures like this, so you don't ever get to see kind of the full scope. And it really shows just how clean everything is and how well he's tied in some of the design, and even with using like the new cooler, has been able to kind of bridge some of that aesthetic and design language gap that would exist between, say, TUF and Strix.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely a great showcase right here. Is that he brings to a really nice kind of cohesive feel, even though we are seeing some mix of components right here, where he's using the Ryu 3 there, which is our latest generation 8th gen Asetek based cooler. It's the 360. He's then got, of course, the TUF Gaming based graphics card in there and a TUF Gaming motherboard, and that's all inside of our latest GT502. You can pick up that GT502 right now. We have actually available in black and white. It's our split chamber chassis. Really, really flexible, has some really, really nice design options. You can do vertical and horizontal mounting. Let me know in the chat right now. Are you team horizontal or are you team vertical? I'm going team horizontal all the way. But definitely the vertical mount right in there looks really, really nice, really clean. He did a fantastic job, of course, just with the layout. Clean, nicely laid out, really nice. I like the lighting profile as well, right? Where it's like, sometimes in RGB, there's sometimes this always kind of sense of like, you got to pick a color, but white in itself, or no colors, right, in itself is also a deliberate choice. And here it just helps to kind of add a little bit of kind of this almost ethereal vibe to it, to kind of show off, I think, the rugged kind of elements that we see within the TUF design ID language. So really, really cool design right here.
Absolutely. Definitely one of my favorites, which is typical to his quality of work. So nothing to be too surprised about there. And we actually have one more to showcase, just something fun from one of our other members who frequently produces quite good work. provided I can find it.
Let's see. While you bring that up, we got Snef cheated. He let us know both. He's team horizontal and team vertical, and I agree. If you guys actually really watch our PCDIY builder spotlights that we have also on Fridays, you guys will know I'm a fan of both. I think it all just depends on the design, right, and kind of the composition that you're trying to nail, right. Sometimes I feel that verticals are a little bit, they're forced and they don't necessarily balance out in terms of the aesthetic, but if it's really been done with the right sense of kind of, I think, design and continuity in terms of kind of how it's laid out and color play, I think it definitely can be a great option. And I've worked a lot with our team over the years to prioritize actually the design for both options. So rest assured, we are always thinking about both. Justin threw out horizontal. We got somebody over on Facebook letting us know a vertical, right? And then let's see right here. Michael says, as long as it still shows a smaller display above the M.2 drive on the extreme motherboard. I would agree. That's one little bit of a bummer sometimes on the vertical mount. Again, is like sometimes it'll obstruct visibility of cool little things that are on the board. And plus, you also have sometimes mechanical access issues, right? Where it's like your M.2 slots might be blocked, or like a PCI Express slot might be blocked. Especially too, if you want to go for those really nice tight vertical mounts, right, where it looks flush almost against the board. They look really great, but then you're pretty much blocking off any type of port access, right? So yeah, there's always a lot of little different things to keep in mind there. So what do we got next up, Jake?
Well, we've got just a fun picture from Justin Chu. I've personally dubbed this RTX Zone because it's a bit ridiculous, but it's the 30 series and 40 series, just kind of showcasing his collection going on here. But I thought it was a nice shot and did a good job to really show, if you can kind of see the differences in how stylings kind of change between these generations. Yep. And then also kind of really highlights some of the nice aesthetics and why some people do choose to go vertical mount with these GPUs.
Yeah, no, and it's cool. Like here, you don't see as much of a picture right there in the top right, but the top right is what we're going to be with in the 30 series. So one of the things that I really love about this photo is you can almost start to see a little bit of the textural difference, but it's hard. Is that, remember on 40 series we went to metal, right? So we have metal shrouds, and then on the 30 series they were actually a composite polymer. So you had actually generally a plastic shroud, right? And sometimes people are like, oh, plastic is no good, right? And to me, it's not. Plastic can be extremely durable, and it allows for a great degree of flexibility in terms of how you can machine it. You can work with colors. You can do a lot of really interesting things. And metal also has a benefit, right? But at the same time, it's a balancing act, right? In terms of not only the cost, the material, the design, the layout, all of what you're trying to achieve. But definitely when we went to 40 series, because of such the performance, we were like, hey, this would just add an additional kind of premium feel and a refinement when you get in the card. And definitely, if we got anybody in the chat that has had an Asus 40 series card, I'd love to know, what was that feeling that you got when you got it right in the hand? Because it is a really just a special card when you get to feel it, and you feel those nice really design points. My favorite probably design point of everything is the chamfered edges on the ROG Strix cards. It's something that a lot of people, when they say the cards look like a brick, I go, show me a brick with chamfered edges, because they don't exist. But that's really, I feel, one of the kind of attention details, which I really think look fantastic. But overall, a really cool fixture. And again, Justin not only does great builds, but he's got a really great eye in terms of his photography too. So also just a great photo in general, right?
Absolutely. And I think this is a good time for us to start discussing some of the differences between the different models. I mean, obviously here you can see that, the TUF cooler looks different than the Strix cooler, but there's a bit more to it than just that. And
yeah, so let me go ahead, and I got an image right here. I'm going to go ahead and bring this guy up here. Let me see here, and show you guys off essentially kind of a little comparative image to. Before I bring this up, I want to see if we ask anybody right here in the chat, right? Can you tell me what are all the series that Asus has in terms of graphics cards? Okay, so there's going to be one in this image that I didn't include. So technically, is it 5? Is it 6? Or is it 7? So we'll see. We'll see how many How many series do we have before I bring up the image right here? And I can tell you, Jake being brand new to the team, he actually forgot about one, but that's okay. We're not going to hold that against him. He's still learning. He's still getting up to speed, and we make a really comprehensive kind of product portfolio. So let's see. So our first vote, I'm going to give it 1 more minute here just to see what our feedback is. So Justin's letting us know he thinks we only have 2. Wow, 2? That's all you think we have? Okay. Snef thinks that we have 5 series. Okay, it's a good vote. 5. Okay, now part of this could be dependent on just your familiarity of which graphics cards you may or may have purchased, right? And so that could ultimately be the determiner of which cards you end up thinking of having. And then we got somebody from Facebook letting us know, hey, 7. All right, let's see. All right, Jake, I think you dropped out there, but hopefully you'll be popping back here in a little bit. But let's go ahead and see here our graphics card series. So this is going to be our current lineup, but it is short of actually 1, and I'll be talking about that in a moment. And if anybody can tell me which is the series that technically we have here, it's our most recent series that got actually introduced, because most of these have now been around for a while, and some of them have been around for a really long time. But in general, we have the ROG Strix series, we have the TUF Gaming series, we have our Dual series, our KO series, our Phoenix series, and our Asus series. So Asus starts off as being our most entry-level models. These are generally going to be cards that are going to include things like our SL, which would be silent, such as, let's say, a single slot-based card with just a passive heatsink. This one right here is the GT730, has 4 HDMI ports on it. I'll go into some images a little bit more for each one of these series just to kind of cover them a little bit more specifically. But this is going to be generally at the most entry level. So you're talking about probably cards that are going to be around $100 or sub $100. So maybe just as a general add-in card, maybe for a basic system, maybe you've got an older platform, you just want to be able to upgrade to something, power it straight from the PCI Express slot, you'd be good to go, right? Stepping up into the Phoenix series, these cards are generally going to be only a single fan. They are also pretty aggressively priced. We're generally going to probably have Phoenix up to about something unlike the, let's say, cards like the GTX 10 series to then GTX maybe 1650 to even an entry level RTX 3050. So it goes up to about a pretty reasonable performance price point in terms of that, but you're not going to be seeing anything, I'd say, in kind of that enthusiast mid-range category, right? But that's going to be the Phoenix series. Phoenix series are also popular maybe for people that are looking for something really compact. So maybe like a small form factor build or a medium form factor build where you're more limited in terms of space. These are going to be very compact based designs. The KO series is pretty new. We've only had it for a couple of years. And this is going to be very similar to the Dual series. They're pretty much almost like brothers in terms that they're almost born at the same age. They're like, let's put it like this. They're like fraternal twins. The heatsink and the fan assemblies are almost going to be generally identical. Clocks are going to be very similar. The main differential is going to be one's a little bit more aesthetically minded for like RGB enthusiasts that want a little bit more lighting because you have front RGB lighting. Because in the past, the only way that you would get more advanced RGB lighting on a card would be jumping all the way up to something like an ROG Strix card. And here you can see for like KO, you can see KO like in the 3060 and 3070 class. So now you start getting into a more enthusiast-oriented GPU that you have available to you. This also comes with a backplate. And I'll show you some images to show you that while it's got that bold and bright design on the front, it does actually have a pretty monochrome design. It looks really nice from the side profile. I really love the way that the KO looks in the side profile. Then we have the Dual series, which I'm going to actually show you a couple of different Duals because we actually have a few different designs, almost depending on the generation that the Dual has been present in. As we guys talked about in last week's stream, we have actually even now Dual white cards, which we've also had in the past with like the Dual 10 series. We have the Dual minis, which are even more compact. We have Duals, which are kind of white and black, like for the GTX 1650. So it's a little bit of mix of kind of variation. You'll see Dual really kind of sit everywhere from that about like 1600 series class of GPU all the way up into something like about like the 3060 class series, so like 3060 Ti. And then many of you are probably pretty familiar with, of course, TUF Gaming. TUF Gaming also sits a pretty wide range, going all the way to stuff down to like GTX 1650, GTX 1660, and then going of course all the way up to something like a flagship like RTX 4090. And outstanding option, right? And then lastly, of course, we have the kind of the best of the best, the ROG Strix series. The ROG Strix series are also going to be generally seeing kind of like a very small number of cards. We generally won't produce it for all the lineups because we really believe ROG Strix is about performance, right? And so when you're really talking about kind of high-end gaming performance, while maybe something like an RTX 3050 is a great product, it doesn't necessarily have the performance, right, that would be in alignment with, let's say, a higher kind of let's say more enthusiast kind of oriented build, right? And so there you're not going to necessarily see a Strix variant that'll be available. So only under select GPUs will you see the ROG Strix edition cards. And we also then have ROG Strix in white, right? So while you don't see the white version there, we have the white. And the last one, did anybody guess, Jake? Did anybody see it in there? I'm going to see. Jake should know it, right? Because he's got maybe a shirt. But what's the series that's missing right here?
I haven't seen anybody comment it yet, so it's going to be the first one with a hint.
Okay,
Anyone?
so yeah, so like your shirt says right there, Noctua, right?
There
so
we go.
Noctua is going to be the final series, right? So there we go. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then 7. So 7 total are going to be all the current series from Asus. And as you guys probably saw again in the prior stream, and of course the little teaser that we've got on YouTube right there, we do have already a 40 series Noctua edition card planned. So let me go ahead and just quickly recap here some of the cards just from a little bit more of a design perspective, see what questions we might have kind of popped in there. If anybody's wondering about any of the cards, one cool thing that I'll note is also keep in mind that the overall design and production process that we have here is going to be consistent across all of our cards. All of them are produced using our Asus Auto Extreme production process, which is that advanced SMT production process and component selection that we talked about in last week's stream. You can actually check that out online if you go to YouTube. You go ahead and type in Asus Auto Extreme. You can actually watch this pretty cool video, which actually goes through the production process. But let's go ahead and check out here. Here's an example right here of, like I said, an SL series card. Very compact card, pretty much single slot. You can see actually multiple versions of it if you want to do something like having like 12 HDMI outs or something along those lines. And here, like I said, this is a GT730. So we have a couple of different versions of these type of cards, but this is an example of what you might see maybe under the standard Asus series-based graphics cards, okay? And next up here, we're going to go into Phoenix. So for Phoenix, we're going to show you guys off actually a Phoenix RTX 3060. So as I noted, the Phoenix, you can actually get up to a pretty high performing variant, right? Because 3060 is still a very competent card, right? You can definitely be gaming 1080p, no problem. Even high refresh rate at 1080p. You can moderately tackle some actually 1440p gaming as well. And if you're doing more kind of casual, even 4K, you can be playing Ori and the Blind Forest in 4K on this card, right? So it's all just dependent again on what's the game, what's the image quality settings that you want to be able to take advantage of, right? So this is going to be the Phoenix card. You'll see, depending on the kind of the GPU, it might get a little bit thicker. Sometimes they might be a little bit more compact. Other times they might be a little bit thicker because they might be using a little bit of larger heatsink. Because you can see right here on this guy, there's actually some pretty large, robust heat pipes that we have on there, along with that, of course, large Axiotech ring barrier type fan design to give us nice, of course, airflow, a nice little backplate design to the card. So still a cool, nice looking card, right? And again, 3060, 12 gigs of memory. This is still a nice little option, especially like I said, if you want to go with something compact, great choice, right?
Yeah, that's definitely something to highlight, is just how useful a card like that can be for something along the lines of like an HTPC, because you're going to get plenty of power for a lot of that kind of couch gaming type content, while staying in that small form factor and staying at that low heat and low power that's desired often for something like a small form factor HTPC type build. So something like that.
And the other thing that I like too is, depending on the model that you're looking at, is I love cards that don't even have any PCI Express power connectors, right? Of course, you have to get to cards that have a pretty low power target, right, in terms of actually their power consumption. So generally, you have to be like under 75 watts. But for the cards that do have that, that's really cool, because literally it's just like plug it in and there's no cables, right? It's literally just plug it straight into a graphics card slot. Next up, we've got dual, and I'm going to show you actually 3 dual cards. So let me go ahead and first actually just kind of give you a little bit of a run through on each one from in the series, just so you can kind of see the difference. Here we've got a GTX 1650. So this is still a card that we actually have available right now, right? And you can see here, it's of course dual because it's 2 fans, right? And you'll see it has the black and then a little bit of kind of white accents in terms of the ID design. So that's going to be our dual 1650. Then we're going to go to checking out a little bit of a higher end dual. So this is going to be the dual RTX 3050. And here, this is going to go to a design that we've had now for about like a year and a half, almost 2 years. And previously was designated as the Mini because it was quite a bit of a compact base card. I think this was just a little bit over 10 inches. So actually pretty compact in terms of its overall dimensions. And you'll see this has this little kind of little RGB light strip. Now, one important thing to keep in mind is on the dual series, you do not have customizable RGB lighting. So unlike, let's say, like TUF Gaming or on the ROG Strix cards where you can customize the lighting through Armory Crate, here this is just a sequence lighting. So you cannot control the lighting. So do keep that in mind. But the KO model that we're going to show about in the next graphics card series, that one does actually have lighting that you can't control. You can still see actually how compact that card is, right? You know, it's very, very tight and compact. Still get a backplate on it. And you can see, of course, as you go to higher grade IO configuration now that you're in a high performing GPU. So one question I ask anybody in the chat, does anybody know what Asus does that's pretty unique in terms of the actual, the material that we use for the actual bracket? Can you tell me? I've talked about it in prior stream, and if you're new, maybe you haven't watched some of my streams in the past, right? What do you think it is? What's special about the material? Jake, what do you think? Do you know?
I'm gonna guess that it's a different metal altogether. And let's see. Is it okay? So it's not stainless steel, is it?
It is actually stainless steel.
Oh, it
Stainless
is.
steel 304 grade. So actually, we're to my knowledge right now the only manufacturer that uses full stainless steel 304 on the actual bracket. Many other manufacturers actually will use some type of a mixed metal composition. It's cheaper to do that, but it doesn't have the same tensile strength that 304 does. And also with 304, it's going to be a really much more durable to any type of humidity or oxidation over time as well. So it's just a little bit more of a premium kind of point, right? But it is something to just know is that, you know, even the actual IO bracket, it is made of that. And where that actually can play a part is that when you install in the chassis, the tensile strength can also help to mitigate a little bit of actually torsion or a little bit of card sag because the metal itself is able to actually keep the weight more in play, as opposed to when it's actually a mixed metal, it might actually have a little bit more malleability, right? It might actually bend a little bit more. So here we have the last dual. So here we've stepped up to a 3060. This is actually a 3060 Ti, and you'll see this one has a little bit of an ID design. I really love just this little subtle accent strip that we have there. Just adds a little bit of a kind of cool kind of dual contrast color scheme that we have on this card, right? Looks really, really nice. Really love this subtle kind of backplate there where it is white, but the white's kind of actually this kind of embossed kind of underlaid kind of color vibe, right? Where it feels that it's just a little bit damped down. So it looks almost more like a gray, right? Which I think works really, really well. But just really clean, really nice. This is actually my kind of go-to card a lot of times for content creators, right? Because I don't feel that they need to make the adjustment all the way up to something like a TUF Gaming or an ROG Strix card, which are fantastic for gamers, but they're even larger. Here you can still get a cool, quiet, and very fast card. You're going to get GPU acceleration. You load up those NVIDIA creator drivers, the studio drivers, and you can get a great experience. So that is going to be the dual series. And let's now go over to, what is it next? The KO, right? Yeah, KO. And so here we'll take a look at the KO series. And you'll definitely see this has a very, very different designs, quite bold, right? This actually comes from kind of actually our friends over in the APAC region, where it was actually designed and developed originally for them. And then we had a lot of people that actually kind of wanted to see it available. So we brought it into North America. And again, it's been a pretty nice option. We've had a couple of people even post about it in the group. Again, cool, quiet, well-built card, right? They're going to be very similar to the dual, but if you want something that's got a little bit more flair in terms of the RGB lighting, then this is going to be the card you want to go with because you do have the control with an Armory Crate. Really nice, clean backplate design. As I noted, right, that vertical might seem a little bit brash or bright for you, right? But again, if you're going in the traditional horizontal, it's going to look really, really clean in the horizontal profile. So you'll notice right there, you don't even see any color, but let's see if we have a different shot here on the side. But yeah, if you noticed here, this is all black, and then you just have this little Asus with just the RGB. So you can imagine in the horizontal profile, it's going to look super clean. It just looks like a clean black card with just a little bit of an RGB accent. So it can work in kind of either scenario in terms of what you're looking for. Yeah, I don't have a side profile shot of it for this one. That's like the closest shot that I have right there. But that is going to be the KO. Let's see if we have any quick questions that we have that might have popped in there.
We definitely have a few. Someone also took a guess that we make it out of Damascus steel.
Oh, that
Maybe
would
not quite.
that would be pretty crazy, right?
I'm all for it, though. I'm all for this.
I could see that. Yep, yep. So now I'm going to go ahead and let's go into the 7th one from the series before we get to TUF Gaming and ROG Strix, because I think everybody knows what the TUF Gaming and the ROG Strix looks like. So let's round it out lastly here before we get in those two with the Noctua. So here we've got the Noctua. So this is going to be the 3080 variant. We had a 3070, we have a 3080, and as I noted, we will have it in the not too distant future for the 40 series. ID design still a little bit to be TBD for the 40 series. We've shown a little bit of a preview of it, but this is a big boy, right? The prior generation, the 3080 was a 4.3 slot card. Absolutely massive, but it was the pinnacle of overall cards in terms of not only temperature performance, but also acoustics, right? These fans, because you are using the gold standard fans from Noctua, they were able to operate at such a low RPM. You were talking about probably they were generally in the 600 to 800 RPM range. So the card was really just supremely quiet in terms of its overall operating profile. Really, really cool, distinctive design aesthetic. Some people, love the color scheme. Other people, they prefer maybe something like the Chromax in black. I really love the color scheme. I love the kind of the warmth that the brown imparts to it, and really has just kind of a renowned ID color, right, from Noctua. But that is going to be the Noctua series-based graphics cards. Absolutely beastly card. And again, for those that are looking for seriously a card that was built to be ultra cool, ultra quiet, and great performance, then this was definitely going to be a card for you. And there you can just see how big that card is, right? From from the back plate to then the PCB to then you can just see the mass, right, that exists there for that massive heatsink assembly, which that had to be a custom heatsink assembly. Some people thought that the heatsink assembly that we used there was actually the same one that we had for the TUF Gaming graphics card. And while we leveraged a lot of the work that we did for the TUF Gaming card, we actually had to optimally resize it and increase it by about almost 30% to be able to better align with the actual diameters for the actual Noctua fans. All right. So that's the Noctua. And then lastly, we can just, I guess, show off there the TUF Gaming and the ROG Strix, which I think probably for most people, they know what those cards look like. But let me go ahead and just bring that up here. So
definitely very common and popular cards, quite well established at this point.
Yeah. So here we've got ROG Strix, right, which you're going to have in the two standard colors right there, right, as far as the monochrome with then a little bit of the RGB accent, with the red and blue accent, and then your RGB. Generally, the ROG Strix cards will usually have the most RGB on them, right? And then we also now have, of course, the white edition base cards, right, which are now coming to the market, right? Again, 4080 and 4090, we talked about that. And then lastly, then we also have the TUF Gaming graphics cards, right? And the TUF Gaming graphics cards, of course, existing throughout the entire lineup. So you got 4090, 4080, 4070 Ti, right? Along with, of course, 30 series. But really right now, the only active 30 series that you're seeing predominantly in terms of availability is going to be like the 3070 Ti V2. That one is kind of like where we see the kind of the positioning, right, in terms of availability. So that is all of our series in terms of our Asus graphics card series. Now, hopefully, now you guys know from top to bottom whether you're going to be looking again for just maybe something on the entry side, something maybe like a GT 730, or then maybe jumping into something like a GTX 1650 or 1660, all the way to a 3060 to a 3060 Ti, 3070 Ti, 4070 Ti, and then 4090. We've got you covered. Wherever yours going to be, we've got an Asus graphics card series for you. So what questions might have popped up there, Jake?
Well, not a question, but I agree with this user, so we're just going to highlight this, that the white Strix makes my eyes water. It is definitely a very beautiful card.
Yeah, it's a fantastic looking card. We worked really, really hard on it. Really happy to see the community be so excited for that card. And I know that there's just a lot of people that are hoping to just continue to see it. And rest assured, we're working really hard to try to be able to push out as much channel inventory and availability as we can for it.
We've got another one asking if it will fit vertical in the Hyperion. I assume that this is asking for probably the Noctua card given its size.
So that's interesting for the I don't know if the Noctua would fit in there, but I'd have to get a pre-check. But I can tell you that the Hyperion we've already designed to fully accommodate our ROG Strix series. So the ROG Strix series and the TUF Gaming series, they're absolutely, you know, super high performance and large cards, and they can fit in the Hyperion no problem, vertically or horizontally. And actually, for a fact, right now we're one of the few chassis manufacturers. All of our high-end chassis support cards both vertically and horizontally. So even the original Helios, which has been out for years, still has no issues in that regard. The Hyperion covers you, the GT501 covers you, and the GT502. So literally all four of kind of our large ATX space-centric chassis all will accommodate cards and that type of configuration support.
So kind of another question about the design, and I guess this plays into some of the compatibility. Why are PCI brackets often like 1 or 2 slots and not, say, 3 or 4 slots?
Yeah, so from my understanding from our team design and development, part of it is just some mechanical clearance considerations. So there's odd kind of little things that when you talk about machining for chassis that some of you builders may know this in the chat, where some things should line up and they don't necessarily always line up when you go to actually rest in the bracket into the slot, right? And what we've generally found is that if you make it 3 or 4, you actually increase that likelihood that maybe there could be a slight off-axis insert. So when you go to put that in, it might not optimally be able to insert. And so you would tentatively get maybe even a little bit better clamping, but we can find that right now, because the higher end cards that we have actually have an internal what's called bracing frame or an anti-torsion frame design, which helps to mitigate card sag. Or if you didn't have that, and there's some manufacturers that do not have this design and their cards will heavily sag,
Yes.
even with a really good weighted chassis. There is a big difference between having that and not having that. That's the main reason why we don't do it, is to try to maximize full compatibility across as many chassis as possible, right? Whether or not there's kind of merit to do it regardless, you could. And it's something that, you know, we try to look at every generation. That's also partly why we also included the supports, right, for the 40 series this generation, just as an additional option. But at this time right now, because we want to try to make sure that we don't run into any unexpected compatibility issues, that's the main reason why. What else? Anything else that come up there? Great. Looking forward to. Okay, yeah. So overall, it looks pretty good right there. I don't see any other questions. Again, if anybody has anything else, they can feel free and let us know. Somebody's asking right here. You mentioned that the white ROG Strix 4090 would be released around the second week of February, and here we are. Do you think we'll still see it? So actually, I do believe that it did start to pop up. Again, it's always it's very difficult for us to give you very specific dates. So what I mean by a specific date is saying like, hey, it's live right now. And part of the reason why is we can generally only maybe do that with like the Asus store. And that's because we have the kind of closest knowledge of when the product is actually getting listed on our site. But once a product actually goes from distribution, right? So from our warehouse to the fulfillment centers at any one of our channel partners, so this could be like Newegg or Amazon or Best Buy, whoever, there could be a wide variance in terms of the timeline for them to get processed, to get their systems up online. And so that's the reason why generally our notifications, when I let people know in the community or we let people know on stream, hey, the product's now going into the channel, it could be 5 days, it could be 7 days, it could be 14 days. In some extreme situations, it can actually be a month, depending on the channel partner and just the timeline that it takes for their processing. So the best thing you can actually really do is actually check with them directly, right? Try to reach out to them, or if they have notification systems in place, you want to register for those notification systems so that you can be notified. On our end, it's very difficult for us to confirm, like I said, that information, because pretty much once it goes into that distribution channel, it's up to that channel partner's respective logistic pipeline in terms of when it's going to get listed up. If you guys are part of our PCDIY group, though, we do try to provide availability notices if we're aware. and they're provided to us by our account manager team or our product marketing team. Or as I noted, if maybe sometimes we're working to have a little bit of an allocation, maybe designated for Asus eStore, we can also let you know there. So it does pay to be part of our PCDIY group. But beyond that, when we talk about availability releases, always keep in mind that they're approximately. It's very difficult to actually give you a specific day.
Absolutely. And I wanted to touch real quick too regarding your comment on the frame. Anyone who's water cooled at this point would have seen those frames and can attest to how much rigidity they add to the card itself. It really is a big part in reducing the sag.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it actually gets often overlooked, but it's definitely part of the cost. And so in case somebody's kind of wondering here, this is an example right here. If you can actually see that here's the heatsink in itself, right? So some manufacturers might actually have just the heatsink, and the heatsink itself is attached to just the GPU, right, and the card. But that will cause a lot of sag. And so here, this entire design, this kind of anti-torsion frame, when it's built in there, it helps to really mitigate a large amount of sag. With a good chassis, actually, I would say a lot of times you might not almost even notice it. You might notice a small amount, but it can be pretty good if you get a really good bond in terms of the chassis material is good along with the card. But of course, if you want perfect no sag, then you might be in that situation where you still might have to put some type of brace or support, right? Okay. Somebody was asking, should it not show on the Asus website? So I'm not sure exactly what you mean by should it show on the Asus website. If you're referring to like stock notification, we do have a notification system for the Asus store. So if you sign up for the text notification, essentially it'll alert you to when that there's stocks of a product actually being listed, right? And if we're selling it directly, then it'll also reflect to you, hey, there's a buy it now option, right? So yeah, and again, we do actually have a dedicated kind of contact number and contact channel for the Asus store. So if you have questions there, you can always reach out to them directly because they're essentially kind of like an isolated department that works just on the Asus store. So if you have questions for the Asus store, make sure to just go to the Asus store website and you can go ahead and look for the contact us option. All right.
Quick mention too, any of the notifications you sign up, always double check and make sure that you've not like opted out of something that will either send it to spam or prevent it from arriving like in your email inbox. Or the same can be said if you do like text notifications for stuff, just as a general reminder that double check how you have things set up and configured so that you're not missing those if you signed up for them and want them.
Yeah, and also, depending on the timeline for like the text notification right now that we've engaged, because we haven't even had it up for a year, this won't qualify. But for sometimes other notification systems, do keep in mind that for policy compliance, some companies that like after a year, they may have to purge your data. So you actually might have to go back and like re-notify, because so you might have thought like, hey, I signed up for something in the past. Why am I not being notified anymore? And it could be that the company might have had to purge your documentation per privacy rights. So that is just also something to keep in mind, is that sometimes occasional audits can actually clear that information out, and you may have to go back and kind of essentially reconfirm that you want to be notified through a certain support channel. Okay. All right.
I think we've only got one more question to touch on.
Somebody's
So
asking about that text notification. Why don't you go ahead and see if you could answer that question, Jake? I'm going to see if I can pull up the text notification for people in the group if they want to be aware of it. So see if I can bring this up.
So regarding boards like the Z690 Extreme, they will support dual GPU. Keep in mind that there's going to be some potential limitations depending on the cards that you choose, given that you have size restrictions and everything. So you'll have to always make sure that the slot configuration will allow it, as spacing between slots can vary board to board. And also keep in mind that no matter how high end a board is and how many features are packed on it, you're going to have at some point have limitations regarding the amount of, like, say, PCIe lanes available, and that's tied into things like your M.2 drives, GPUs, if you're doing any kind of capture card, sound cards, etc. So you'll always want to look through the manual and look through the actual board details itself and make certain that whatever card you're choosing, that it's all fully compatible. But as a general answer, yes, the board itself can support multi GPU options. such as like SLI if you're running that for older cards, or even some of the newer cards, kind of more on the workstation and development side, can still utilize that.
Yeah, you actually
So
do want to check on this though. So there's actually been a couple of changes because right now there's not active development from NVIDIA regarding multi GPU or NVLink kind of configurations. I can actually tell you that one, for the Z690 Extreme, it does not actually support Crossfire. It will actually only support NVLink. And then on Z790, there's no multi GPU support. Essentially, that was enabled. And like I said, that just is an alignment with right now, kind of where the development is right now on the kind of development side. The best way that you can always confirm on that is, as Jake did note, though, is just check your tech spec information. The tech spec information underneath the multi GPU will tell you whether or not a multi GPU is going to be supported, and if there's a UEFI requirement. During the pandemic, actually, some people might not be aware, like the NVIDIA NVLink, or what some people sometimes refer to as SLI, the actually certification lab was closed down. So there was actually a delay in terms of getting certain things actually validated. So that can actually be something that has to be accounted for. So just kind of keep that in mind in that respect, right? Is that that isn't a factor right now. We already released the UEFI, so they're all kind of good to go. But it can be important to not only have technically the motherboard, the firmware, and the driver all have to support that. And then you also, ideally, you need to have matched VBIOSes. So the cards should be certainly identical cards, right, with the same VBIOS to engage within the NVLink support if you want to run multi-GPUs. All right. From there, in case anybody is wondering about it, if you guys are part of our PCDIY group, you guys can go ahead and use this specific text number. This number is exclusive to the PCDIY group. It's one that we created just for our PCDIY group, but you can go ahead and do text notifications for 40 series based graphics cards updates if you guys are interested in. So go ahead and take a look at it right there. It's text PCDIY to 278762 to receive your notifications if you want to take advantage of that. All right, guys? All right, very, very cool. All right, what do we got next, Jake?
just a quick note: no dual 40 series cards yet, but
yeah, and I don't think at least right now there would be no plans, because generally for the dual series they don't go up kind of high enough within our series kind of designation to be offering kind of a dual variant, right? So if you guys notice, we generally kind of limit the dual up to something like in the 3060 class, right? 60 series class. Once you kind of step into that next class, those are usually going to be from a different series.
So I think next it's time to kind of get more into the feature discussion for today. So as we go through these streams, we're going to be discussing more and more, like I said, about the actual tech that some of these cards and the features that they just come with natively or get added later on through updates and stuff has kind of been highlighted. So the primary topic's going to be about Reflex, but just to kind of touch on some of the features that are available. It's broadcast, it's DLSS3 that we talked about a little bit last week. You've got, let's see.
Yeah, there's tons of them, right? I think these are all kind of a lot of the supplemental technologies. So you've got everything from Reflex to, like you said, NVIDIA broadcast. You've got super resolution. You've got dynamic super resolution, and also the new deep learning dynamic super resolution, right? You've got RTX voice, right? You've got the AV1 media encoder engine. You have RTX, right? I mean, the reason why you had to go from GTX to RTX is ray tracing, right? That's a whole new one in itself, right? These are all kind of cool technologies, but in this stream, I think we want to touch on kind of something that isn't always talked about, but it actually makes a really big experience. Makes a really big change in terms of the experience that you have when you're gaming, which is going to be actually system latency, right? And so this is going to be really part of NVIDIA Reflex. So that's what we're going to get into. Before we jump into that, though, I just want to answer quickly. We saw a question right there. Will there be more stock on the Z790 Apex boards? Yes. I covered this in our PCDIY stream. Again, you want to be part of our PCDIY group, but for the Apex, it was a limited edition product. You should have bought it when it came out, because essentially when it was sold out, it sold out and was gone. But we have gone back to our headquarters production facility to essentially allot a second edition run. So this is not normal, but we will allot a second edition run, and we will have it available in March. If you're part of the PCDIY group or watch our Friday streams, you will find out about when that availability will occur, but you can expect it in March.
Before we start into Reflex, I'm going to just put a link into chat. This is actually for broadcast. I recommend kind of taking a look over some of this, especially since some people are into streaming, whether for gaming or other purposes. But the big thing here is that NVIDIA is actually collecting feedback. And while the discussion for today is going to be more oriented towards Reflex, I think it's always worthwhile to highlight when a brand is willing to take this feedback and listen, because it's not always the case in the industry and should always be kind of praised when it is. So I'll go and put that in. Feel free to take a look at it. And if it's something that interests you, give feedback. But for this stream, we're going to talk about Reflex. And this is something that is, as JJ mentioned, related to the latency that you'll have in game. And there'll be some content, some videos kind of coming out to better explain on this fairly soon. But at least for now, we kind of want to give everyone an idea of what exactly it is, how does it impact latency, and more importantly, how does it benefit you?
Yeah, and I think an important part here is just looking at kind of from the highest level, which here I just want to kind of show this off for people is that um, when you talk about kind of the system experience, everything that you're experiencing on your system is defined by system latency. And you have different things within your PC, within your system that influence that total system latency. And these are broken down into essentially specific portions of what are called the system latency or the chain, right? That your system is going through to ultimately give you the kind of end game experience. And so you have actually everything will impart its own actually latency, right? So you have input latency, which actually comes from your keyboard and for your mouse. You have game latency. You have render latency. The PC latency is, of course, that combined together in terms of game latency and render latency, and then your display latency, which is your monitor, right? And so many of us are aware of kind of each one of these respectively, right? We know, hey, on monitor, I have to account for like, what's the pixel response, right? I have to account for my refresh rate, right? I might have to account how good is the scaler there? Is it adding actually any post-processing delay, right? That's something that we saw a big difference between like a monitor and between TVs, or the reason why we had to come up with years ago, we called something game fast input, because we didn't want to add any input lag or any input processing on your DP or HDMI for your monitors, right? We wanted to try to see is what you see is what you get as quickly as possible, so that you weren't adding something on top of maybe your pixel response delay, right? Or your refresh rate, right? You were trying to manage that. And you can see this is the entirety. So I think this is a good thing to first kind of start off is understanding each one of these present it's actually its own pain point. And ultimately, you need to try to look at each one of them to understand what is affecting your ultimately this right here, this system latency, right? So Jake, go ahead and continue on there. I'm sorry, you were showing off some stuff there, but I just wanted to kind of give a little bit of a high level point there.
No, it's always good to have your input, JJ. I don't think anyone's ever going to complain about that. So Reflex itself kind of centers around three major components. It's going to be the GPU, which is kind of obvious, but it also includes the monitor and the mouse. And one of the big points that you'll see talked about, whether you're watching any kind of the videos that they have present or reading through about this, is that the whole idea is when you're in a game, it especially at any kind of high competitive level, and this isn't just like top tier esports, but even people that are playing at home, there are times where it's that millisecond or two matters on whether you get the shot off or not. And it's a frequent conversation when it comes to things like ping and lag, stuff of that nature. And it's part of why higher refresh rate monitors have become more and more popular, because getting the info sooner and being able to react faster, that's all crucial to how well you can perform. And Reflex is designed to kind of take some of that latency between when you're actually acting, generally, aiming or shooting, and reducing that so you can be faster, which obviously increases accuracy and increases the chance to get the shot off in time versus.
Yeah. So,
being the one on
so
the losing side there.
here's like a good visualization of it, right? When we talk about a system that might have low system latency, right? And so remember, system latency is everything, right? We're talking about everything from the peripheral to the display to the render. All of that is being accounted for. And we can see here when we have this really tight one, you can see your current view to this new view, right? So if you're somebody that's doing what's called peaking, right? If you essentially, you're going to have legitimately an edge, right? Because you're going to see your actually total latency is going to allow you to actually see that information more quickly, and then also be able to target with better precision, especially for flick shots, right? For those quick moments. Whereas you can see right here, if somebody had higher system latency, you can actually still see like the current view, and then all the way down here, right, the new view. And you can see how that actually then will impart a difference, right, in terms of the experience. And so the great thing is that NVIDIA already had for a long time, they essentially had a legacy option before they actually implemented NVIDIA Reflex that was available to you. You see right here, I think I have an image from it within the control panel that you could go ahead and toggle on, right? And so you used to have an option right here that you could go in, and so it's actually still there, the low latency mode, right? That you could go ahead and enable. And this was a general kind of option that was available to you, and it's one that you should have probably enabled just in general to be able to give you better overall latency. The difference though is NVIDIA Reflex though is dependent on the API in the game engine, so it has to be essentially baked in. It has to be put in by the game developer. But once it's there, it essentially can even have more an advanced version of essentially improvement in terms of how the processing queue and the rendering queue is managed. And the reason why we would want to do that, right, is we go back to that other slide that I was kind of taking a look at there. Let me see if I have I think I have another one right here. When we take a look at something in this actually can show you kind of how the length occurs through the entirety of the system latency chain. And you can see right here, here's my mouse. Maybe if this is really short or really long, this is where something simply, you having like 1,000 hertz mouse, right? Or 500 hertz to 1,000 hertz, or, we were actually, I think, one of the very first manufacturers to actually release a true 1,000 hertz with the original Gladius. Right. And now, of course, we have, models like our Chakram X, which actually have an 8,000 hertz polling rate. Why would you want 8,000 hertz? Guess what? That shrinks down some of that peripheral latency, right? You can see then you've got some more going on here. You've got sampling, simulation, render submission, the driver. These are where important tuning improvements happen within, let's say, the game ready driver, the render queue, the compositing. That's all part of that optimization that occurs within the game, them adding in the reflex to be able to shrink that down, make the actual processing more efficient so that they can actually reduce that. Once you start to get down here in terms of the display latency, now you're talking about things that it might be on the monitor, right? So having a high refresh rate monitor, having low pixel response time, right? Having a scaler that isn't adding any processing delay, right? So the more that we can shrink these things down, ultimately it gives us just a lower overall system latency a measurement value, and that's going to give you essentially better responsiveness, right? You're going to be able to see things more quickly, be able to aim more accurately, and have a smoother, more responsive experience. And I think a really interesting point, and I don't know if you were going to touch on this, Jake, is that NVIDIA's found, and I also actually, I believe in this, and personally, even from when I game, is that system latency is actually more important to me than frame rate, because you could, oddly enough, you could actually have like a high frame rate, but your latency could be on the lower side, right? And you would actually ideally rather have the inverse. You would actually rather have lower latency with the lower peak frame rate, right? Now, ideally, they should be kind of hand in hand, right? You want high refresh rate and low system latency, right? But latency is going to be more noticeable in terms of, I think, directly affecting you than just purely frame rate is, right?
Absolutely. And as you kind of touched on, JJ, it's part of a full ecosystem. So we'll go ahead and discuss a little bit about, actually, we'll answer this question that just came in because I think it's a good one. Would direct storage help with this?
It's a good one. So right now we're just kind of in the beginning of seeing kind of how direct storage can play a part. But direct storage, yes, technically you should be able to see that total kind of system latency should be improved with direct storage, because you're able to feed that information more quickly into the actual GPU's memory, right? So that should be able to provide a benefit. But overall, again, this is really just not one part. It's multiple parts across the entirety of the actual system chain, right, in terms of what produces latency. So it's not just direct storage, right? It's the GPU, it's the GPU driver. And this is where NVIDIA has really been kind of the leader in this space, not only creating the tool sets that you see from a lot of the leading media when they talk about even measuring latency, they were doing it with LDAT, which NVIDIA was the one that helped to release out to them so that they could actually measure this, because before to do it, it's really expensive. You needed a lot of specialized equipment, high-speed specialized cameras. It was quite complex to be able to do any of this. And so now it's actually really cool that you could literally buy like one of our Asus NVIDIA Reflex enabled monitors, plug in then a Reflex compatible mouse, and be able to measure all of this just real time on your screen and actually know what's really happening exactly with your system. If you make changes, what actually happens, right? So like imagine right here, being able to go ahead and, bring up the value information, right? Knowing, hey, if I'm going from that 500 hertz to 1000 hertz, right? Or if I'm going to 8000 hertz in terms of the polling rate, maybe on my new, ROG Chakra Max mouse or something like that, I can actually see the difference in terms of my system latency, right? Or if I make these settings and these changes, I'm getting lower system latency, because sometimes we make changes and we don't necessarily know what's really going on with our system, right? We can guesstimate, or we might just be looking at the frame rate value, but we're not necessarily looking at, like I said, what might be more representative of really giving us a change in terms of the performance, which is going to be the latency that you have. And this also then gets back into something else, which is quite interesting, which let me see if I have it here. When you talk about, a lot of times people talk about games being GPU bound or CPU bound, right? And it's important to kind of understand GPU bound and CPU bound, because they aren't kind of, let's say, they aren't fixed essentially. Depending on what's going on in the game, they will actually vary. And so you can actually see right here, let me actually just go back to this one here first. If you take a look here, if anybody's in the chat right here, what can you tell me, what do you think this is? Do you think this is CPU bound, or you think this is GPU bound? Jake, what do you think?
I have no clue. This is way above my understanding.
So if we actually take a look, we can actually see, right? Because here we can see that the CPU is able to kind of process through this very, very quickly, right? And so here we can see that we're actually more limited in terms of the GPU, right? And on the other way around, we can see right here that the actual frame times, right, it's taking longer for the CPU. So one's more CPU bound and one's more GPU bound, right? And the cool thing is kind of understanding this and then having information that you can actually have on your system to kind of know what's going on can help you to make the right decisions, whether that's you wanting to, have a frame rate cap, to disable VSync, to change these system settings, right? I think the most important part is ultimately being able to visualize this information and know what you're looking at, right? So that you can ultimately have a smoother and more responsive experience. And the great thing is that with, these NVIDIA GPUs, not only are you getting the performance that you need, right? That's like a great thing, going to a 30 series or then going to a 40 series card, right? You're getting not only the higher FPS performance that these cards can impart, but then you get the ability to enable things like Reflex across a wide range of games, which I don't know if we have the game table right here as far as what's present, right? But NVIDIA is consistently adding in, just in that game ready driver, right, that we talked about today. NVIDIA just added World of Warcraft, so we got another game that plays a part here. And I'll tell you, system latency, for those of you, I'm not a competitive player. For me, I'm all about single player narratives. That's 100% what I like to play. The only time I play competitively is with maybe like a friend online, if I'm doing like a friendly match with a friend. But otherwise, in terms of like ranks, I don't like playing like ranked ladders. But if that's you, then actually latency is even more critical, because you generally have much more variation within system latency in a multiplayer scenario than you would within like a single player scenario. And that's just because there's a lot more processing that needs to occur. There's a lot more dynamic loading. There's a lot more variability inherently in what's being kind of rendered and put out on screen. And so that's important there. So I think this is the game list, Jake.
Yes, it is. And you can see, as you mentioned, there's quite a wide range here. We've got A Plague Tale, which has been a more popular series lately and kind of getting highlighted. And you've got more competitive titles like Modern Warfare 2, Dota 2, for example. iRacing, which again, like last week we just talked about, has an OSD from GPU Tweak 34. So even on things that are not maybe like your first-person shooter oriented, you're getting some of these benefits in it. But then there are a lot like Overwatch 2, Rainbow Six Siege, and then just for JJ, Warhammer 40K Dark Tide even has it.
Hey, there we go.
Valorant's going to be another big one for a lot of people that, you can experience some of these benefits for and kind of help give you just that little bit extra edge in gameplay, which at times can really make a difference. It's not something you might always see every game, but there will be moments where that little bit of extra latency is what can help you, be clutch on that one play, and that can be all it takes sometimes.
Yeah, this is a really interesting graph here that NVIDIA did with kind of a controlled kind of test study that I thought was really, really kind of interesting. And it shows you how much of actually a performance benefit you can legitimately have by lowering your latency. And there's some great videos that you guys can check out online that actually kind of help to kind of show this. And it's because ultimately you're going to be able to see, like I said, those things more clearly and more consistently, right? So you can see right here that like at 100 milliseconds versus like 20 milliseconds, look at the aiming improvement. So the same person, everything else kind of being the same. If we move down and we make those improvements, right, in terms of not only the FPS, but also the system latency going down here, you can see that they're actually aiming is improved. That's a pretty big jump. Like when you're talking about if like you were over here and then you get all the way to like 37, it's almost double, right? I mean, it's pretty crazy, right? Excuse me, not double, but a 20% increase. That's a noticeable uplift, right? In terms of actually your range of improvement that you talk about, right? So this is something that can definitely improve in part. And keep in mind, we're about to even kick this up further, right? 40 series cards are legitimately some of the only cards that you could be now establishing the next level of performance now with not only OLED displays, but our upcoming ROG Swift 540 hertz monitor, right, is also going to get you to that next level of even having, again, lower latency, right? So you pair that up with where you've got, your the fastest, keyboard and mice that you can get. Then you got your fastest display, your fastest GPU. You've got a game engine that supports that, right? And bam, you can really start to see how you can really help to kind of tune these things down to be able to give yourself an impressive level of performance, right? And really allow you to have I think a more consistent experience. Because I think that's the thing is that some people, even if you're a great player, this only makes a great player even better because you still have to understand like mechanics in terms of like how to aim, how to turn, how to pick up audible cues. Those things are not going to, reflex is not going to make you a better gamer in that respect. But if you're somebody that is already, you're being consistent about where you're actually sniping or where you're taking your flick shots, you might think that you're hitting something, but you're actually missing it because of something like system latency. Maybe your system latency is high, right? And if you were to bring down your system latency, all of a sudden you might be starting to make more of those hits consistently because where you're actually aiming is actually what you end up shooting at, right? Is actually, so that is, I think that the kind of the whole end game here of what you're hopefully trying to get out of this is that I think it's, it's the WYSIWYG, right? It's what you see is what you get, right? You're trying to get closer to that. What you see is what you get and being able to actually achieve that.
Yeah, it's easy to sum it up that rather than having to actually, I don't want to say put thought into what you're doing, because obviously with any competitive game, there's a lot of thinking and mental aspect of it that's involved, but everything's more natural. You're not having to consider the delay between shots as much when you can kind of point and click and what you're needing to happen does happen more immediately. So not having to wait on that delay and account for it in the middle of a faster paced game, especially, it can really make everything flow more naturally and be a bit more instinctual for you. And as JJ mentioned, a lot of this, especially before, was a bit more trial and error of swapping hardware out and seeing what felt faster to you. But with the right combination of hardware and the right games, you're actually able to have the performance overlay up, and that will directly let you monitor the mouse latency, the PC to display latency, and the system latency. And so as you make any changes and you're really trying to hone in on getting the most advantage you can, this will give you some of that feedback to let you know how the numbers are actually playing out. Like, are you actually reducing latency and are you getting the most out of it?
Exactly. And so, we have a great ecosystem of components that, can help to ultimately enable this experience. I do guys want to show you just here this little bit kind of a shot, which is again, a little bit of kind of an example you can see right here where like 144, I think 165. A lot of people have a 144, 165. 240 is starting to become more accessible, definitely over the last about year and a half, 2 years, seeing more 240 hertz options. Of course, we have these. We also even have 280, we have 360 hertz. And like I said, we are going to have our 540 hertz in the not too distant future. But you can see right here, right, where when you take advantage of these higher refresh rate displays, you have a game engine that enables reflex. You then toggle that in with the performance, right, that you have within a higher end GPU. This is an example of it, right, where you can see that, you know, you're actually lined up and you're able to see those things earlier, right? And that's allowing you to be more precise when you hit your shots, right? And you have to keep in mind, this is all happening within, you know, your it's all happening, you know, just that quick, right, in terms of flick accuracy. And some people even, they ask questions about, like, can you see that fast? It's very interesting. If you actually look at some of the most advanced motion studies, there's already been motion studies that have shown humans have what's called strobe detection, right, which is already hundreds of hertz that have already been confirmed at 500 hertz plus. So people's perception of thinking that the refresh rate isn't part of the factor of like what you can see, that's also not accurate, right? So there's a lot of kind of things that you have to account for. But I think the main thing, hopefully, here that you guys get is that, you know, there's a lot of parts that ultimately influence the, that affect system latency, right? But the great thing is here is that you just have more tools with this great ecosystem from Asus and NVIDIA to be able to go ahead and allow you to not only monitor it, but then to improve upon it, right? So you can go in and you can actually register what those values might be and know how your system's actually working. Know, okay, all of a sudden, hey, I want to make an improvement. I can go ahead and tweak that. I can make that change, right? So if you guys are wondering what that would look like, here's an example of the information you can see, like read out on the screen. You'll see like client FPS, game latency, render latency, game to game render latency, right? You can see that information. You can make your changes. You can know what's going on, right? So Jake,
I'm gonna go ahead and drop a link.
Oh yeah. Feel free. Go ahead and drop a link in there. I think you also noted we had a list of some of the items that we have as far as on the mouse side too, because we do have, of course, monitors that have full support for NVIDIA Reflex. So right now we actually are the #1 NVIDIA Reflex mouse manufacturer that's supported. So we have more mice validated than any other manufacturer for NVIDIA Reflex.
Absolutely. To kind of give you a brief summary, the Chakra models, so Chakram X and Chakram Core, the Gladius 3 models, whether that's the Aimpoint, just the basic wireless, or the standard, same for the Keras, and also for the Spatha X, and then the Strix Impact 3, and those all cover it. And then in addition, while it's not on NVIDIA's list yet on the website and hasn't been updated, the new Heart Ace AimLab is also included in that as well. So
yeah. And
almost all the recent mice.
Yeah, do keep in mind also, you do want to double check. You can double check on NVIDIA's website for the NVIDIA Reflex support, but it does depend sometimes occasionally between wireless and wired. Many of the models that we noted do have wireless support NVIDIA Reflex. And then pretty much always like it's the default generally will also be supported in wired, but you do want to double check if it's going to be in like wired and wireless mode, or if it might just be for wired, because sometimes depending on a couple of different factors, that can vary between one mouse to the other, right? So like, and some of it sometimes is very straightforward. Like the Strix Impact 3, it's only a wired mouse, so of course you can't have wireless NVIDIA Reflex support, right? But the Keras wireless, take for instance, right, it can support both wired and wireless NVIDIA Reflex. Okay.
Of course. And then from the monitor side, we've got 3 at the moment. The PG279QM, which is, I believe it's been out for a little while, correct, JJ?
That's correct. And we will not be, some people have asked like, hey, are you going to like get rid of that model or anything like that? No, we have no plans to eliminate that model. So we will be keeping that ROG Swift 240 hertz display, even though we just recently came out, of course, with the ROG Swift 360 hertz 1440p, right? Mm-hmm. So the AQN, right?
Yeah, and then that's, so for the PG259 QNR, that's going to be a 1080p 360 hertz. If you're wanting to stay more in that 1080p gaming for the GPU you have, or just to push the FPS even higher. And then also, as JJ just mentioned, the PG27AQN, which is the new one, is 360 hertz, and that one's 1440p. So as he mentioned, now we're even getting into kind of those higher resolutions while still maintaining that like real high refresh rate and high performance gaming, and something like a 40 series allows you to do that as well.
Yeah, let me see if I can bring up the pages just for these guys. So if anybody wants to make sure that they want to check these out, you guys can check them out right here. So again, just to recap right here, we've got the ROG Swift PG279QM. So this one is essentially the 27-inch 1440p 240 hertz fast IPS 1 millisecond gray to gray. This one has the dedicated G-Sync module. All of these will have the dedicated G-Sync module, which also brings advanced validation, also brings best-in-class variable overdrive performance, factory calibration support, all that great stuff in there. So this one, and this, I think this one should be around $799. So it's a little bit lower in terms of the price point than the higher end model, which is going to be the AQN. The AQN will be the 360 hertz ultra fast IPS, and then also you have the PG259 QNR, which will be the 1080p 360 hertz. Right, so those are going to be your different options. I will drop those in the link. So give me 1 second, and I'll drop those into the chat.
We also have a good question related to this. So can wireless mice be as fast or faster than a wired mouse, even if they're sharing the same polling rate?
Well, technically, wired mice would still ultimately be superior in terms of just the assured lowest latency, and also because they can still support even faster polling rates, right? But technically, right now, especially with our latest generation wireless mice, we do have models that essentially can be, sub 1 millisecond, so have outstanding performance in terms of that. So, from a competitive standpoint, right, there's not any kind of concern in terms of saying legitimately having a great experience when it comes to a wireless versus a wired experience. It just comes down to kind of your preference in that regard. And that's pretty much going to be for all of our models. If you kind of want the absolute best performing models, then go with any of our ROG mice, like new Aimpoint models that have the new Speed Nova wireless chipset, which is our fastest wireless chipset. But technically still, yes, wired is going to still be kind of the gold standard, absolute best. But it's very, very good now from wireless perspective.
And that's, at least for the foreseeable future, probably will always be true, just because of the differences between wireless and wired and underlying software, firmware, things of that nature. But wireless has come a really, really long way. And I definitely know that for someone of my skill level, which is not very high, mind you, but I've not been able to notice any difference when utilizing a wireless mouse versus a wired mouse. For me, I actually tend to prefer the wireless because it's feels more comfortable and easier for me to use. So
Yeah.
generally, I perform a little bit better with the wireless, even if there might be some, to a very high level player, of that very slightly perceptible difference, if it does exist.
Yeah, and this all comes down. I mean, I think that we have models that, especially with our RG paracord cable, which is super light. It's almost like a drag-free experience. It can be really, really, really good. But yeah, I mean, just comes down to your preference. And again, almost every one of the mice that we have on the high-end side are tri-mode. So that means it's pick your poison, right? Do you want to go wired, or do you want to go wireless, and you're good to go. Guys, I do remember on the link that I showed, you might have seen incorrect pricing. So I just want to make sure before I drop these in the chat, this is the correct pricing. So you'll see $399 right now for the QNR. The 360 hertz, it's going to be, right here. It's going to be $1050. This one should still be available at some other e-tailers right now, but it's been very popular, right? That's the 360 hertz. And then when we move over to the 9QM, which is going to be the 240 hertz, at $750, right? So you can see it's a few $100s kind of in between each model, depending on which one you're looking at, okay? And this one should be back in stock probably by about the end of this month, okay? All right, so let me go ahead and drop those in the chat. Give me 1 second.
And just to kind of reemphasize the point from before, the fact that we've just launched the Heartbase AimLab edition, and that it comes in that tri-mode, and that it is so heavily dedicated towards kind of like that top tier performance in esports, and again is still tri-mode, should tell you a lot that you no longer really need to worry so much about wired versus wireless. when you're gaming, and if that's going to have a negative impact on your performance in the game. Because if that was the case, you'd end up with something to where, you know, there is no wireless esports oriented gaming mouse or these high competitive level gaming mice. You're going to have something to where it would be only wired for that, because there would be issues like it used to be years ago. So that's definitely not something that you need to like be nearly as concerned about anymore.
Yep. And I'm going to say, just for those of you kind of might be wondering, just if kind of you're looking for a general kind of recommendation, my recommendation right now, if you're looking for a GPU, like to maybe make an upgrade, I think the TUF Gaming 3070 Ti V2 is a great choice. And then also the TUF Gaming 4070 Ti are going to kind of get my two picks. If you're looking for a card that's really built to be able to drive these high refresh rates, be cool, quiet, fast, right? And have kind of that great balance in terms of giving you a card that's really going to be enabling, I think, a great experience when it comes to taking advantage of NVIDIA Reflex. And then all these other NVIDIA technologies that we haven't talked about, those are going to be two great options.
Absolutely. Picking yourself up something like the 4070 Ti when it's going to absolutely crush something like CSGO, or some of these other more popular esports titles where they're not necessarily as graphically intensive, and then putting in that extra savings into something like the monitor and your mouse and your keyboard setup, that goes a lot further towards the overall experience that you're going to have. So we'll absolutely back that recommendation to look into that series, especially with like just how good of a value the TUF is right now.
Yeah, and those start off
comparatively.
at $799. Starts off our 4070 Ti series. If you guys are kind of interested, that's the standard model, and then I linked the OC model in. Right now, those are sold out already currently at the Asus store. So they should be coming back in stock shortly. But then again, you can also check those out from other e-tail partners, our retailers. So Micro Center, Best Buy, Newegg, Amazon, B&H. Whatnot. And then right here, it looks like we got somebody that says, yeah, I have a TUF Gaming 4070 Ti, good card and pretty compact. Yeah, the nice thing about the Ti got shrunk down a bit. It's still a big card in terms of its overall heatsink and fan assembly, still a triple slot based design, but it is definitely a bit more compact than what you have compared to the 4080 and the 4090 series. So definitely it's much more friendly to be able to fit into quite a bit more number of chassis. Okay. Anything else that we got there, Jake?
I think that covers the majority of our big topics for today.
Okay, very cool. Very cool. All right. So I did think, I had a potential little bit of a quick demo here, guys. I don't know if anybody's interested, or, maybe we can save it to next stream. You can let me know if you guys want to see it. I can jump into it. But we thought, hey, might be kind of interesting maybe in these streams to be able to kind of give you guys a little bit of kind of foundational tips on how to do kind of easy little things that you can do to be able to take advantage of your system. So we've talked about in the past GPU Tweak 3, but I thought, hey, why not actually just show you a little bit quick of a real-time UI and how to actually take advantage of the OC option if maybe you don't know how to overclock at all, right? In maybe a future one, we can definitely go through a little bit more advanced customization to go through the VF curve, or maybe through, more kind of complex overclocking options. But if you just literally want a single option that you can just enable to be able to get a little bit more performance, we have a really easy, accessible option within GPU Tweak 3 that I can show you guys. So if you guys are interested in that, I can go ahead and walk you guys through that. What are we thinking? What are you thinking? What are you thinking, Jake? I'm gonna let Jake be the arbiter. He can decide.
I mean,
all right. So
we had someone answer before I
interesting.
could. It's interesting. Let's go.
All right,
I agree because I'm
right.
interested in how can I get free FPS.
Okay, sure. Let me go ahead and cut over here to my secondary display here. And all right. So hopefully you guys should be able to see that there. Let's see if maybe we can tweak this a little bit there. Jake, we're going to make you... Okay, yeah, that's fine. All right. And so you guys should be able to see kind of here the Windows environment. So I've gone ahead and downloaded GPU Tweak here. We're running in the operating system. This is a 3080 TUF Gaming graphics card, but this will work for any one of our graphics cards. Essentially, all you need to do is that when you bring up the actual UI right here, you'll see a couple of different things. One, we have our built-in monitor. The monitor is really cool because you got these things like import and export logging functions, which I'm a really big fan of. You can actually go ahead and export your log and then save your log and then compare it to, let's say, like your overclock, your standard clock to your overclock, right? And you can actually compare those two, and I really love that. And you can also go in and customize all this. So if you want to go ahead and change what's being monitored or what, or the kind of the position it is, you can go ahead and drag it and drop it. You can make that adjustments if you want, right? I don't need to make any changes right now, so I'll just go ahead and leave it like that. I'm fine. So we're just going to go ahead and back out. And if I wanted to go ahead and decouple that, remove that out of my way, I could do that and just take a look here at this default. And so what you'll see right here is you have the default mode, and then right here you're going to see you have the OC mode, and it's literally as simple as just clicking the OC mode. Once you click the OC mode, it will automatically apply the overclock to your graphics card. Now the cool thing is that this OC mode is a kind of a validated overclock that we have, that we've kind of pre-checked internally, that should give you a little bit more performance. It's not going to be massive, but again, this is just a kind of a free overclock that you have. And if you want to be able to go ahead and, like I said, make more adjustments, you could go ahead and define a user mode, or you could use this as your OC mode versus the default mode. So you can see right here, our default was at 1785, right? And then here, our overclock, right, we went up to 1850, right? And so it goes ahead and makes that adjustment. You can also see that it adjusted actually the power target. So the power target is actually the amount of power that the card is kind of allowed to use. And when we increase the power target at the expense of a little bit of heat and, of course, power, the card can produce a little bit more performance. And so generally, this kind of goes hand in hand with overclocking. You may need to increase your power target along with your clock speed. But the great thing is, like I said, you don't need to know about any of that. If you just kind of want a little bit of reference of what's happening, it is making an adjustment there to the power target, and it is making a change there to the GPU boost clock. Once you're done, that's it. It has gone ahead and applied that, and you are set. Now, you do have more options that you have available here. So you can see if you wanted to automatically start with Windows, right? You can do that. There's also an option right here for extending the overclocking range. There's also right here a little tooltips option, which I really like. And you'll see you have some other options right here in terms of making adjustments to how the information is laid out and how it's presented to you. And even right here, the hotkeys is pretty cool, which you can actually do some cool things like automatically switch your overclock or your standard clock just through hotkeys. So you can see like Control-Alt-G versus Control-Alt-C. You can automatically immediately toggle those. So that's pretty sweet in terms of just kind of giving you some more flexibility. So if you guys want kind of a little bit of a tip on how you can kind of check for easily overclocking, let me go ahead and double check here on my demo and see if I have it installed here and how I can show you how I can quickly do a performance test. So let me go back here and give me 1 second. Let me just see if I have this installed on this one. Okay, so I think I should have it in here. All right, let's see here, guys. Oh, okay. Actually, I don't have that download installed there. So let me see if I can go ahead and get it installed for you guys. But there's a lot of course, different benchmarks that you have available to you that allow you to go ahead and test that. One of the easy ones, it's an older one, depending on games that you may or may not have in your kind of library, if you want to be able to try things out. You can always go into a different kind of sites to be able to download files. You've got like Gravity Mark, which is a free GPU benchmark. You've got Base Mark. There's a Final Fantasy Endwalker benchmark, which is openly available. There's, of course, Unigine, which also has availability. There's also going to be like Resident Evil. There's a Sniper benchmark. There's a few different kind of benchmarks that are available that are just kind of available as a downloadable exe. And then, of course, if you've got games, there's tons of benchmarks in different games, everything from, Batman to Forza to Metro, right? That all have their own benchmarks that are built in that you can run that. Ideally, you want to try to find a benchmark that is pretty stable. The stability is important to be able to kind of have run-to-run variance, not be that large so that you can kind of clearly see how much of a performance uplift occurs. But the important thing that you want to keep in mind is that when you are taking a look at the game engine, the tricky thing that is kind of present is that some games will be more responsive to different types of overclocks than others, right? So some games actually might benefit more from maybe a little bit of a memory overclock, and then other games might actually benefit a little bit more from a GPU-centric overclock. So it depends. Just because you overclock doesn't necessarily mean you're going to see a consistent uplift across any game engine that you apply the overclock with. The other cool thing is that in GPU Tweak 2, you can also do what's called app profiling. So if you don't necessarily want to run your graphics card overclocked, right, all the time, you can actually have that set up with like an on-screen display and clock profiles that'll only load up into specific applications. So the moment you maybe jump into like Rainbow Six Siege, or you jump into Far Cry, or you jump into Destiny, you can have that triggered and enabled. But then when you're like back to your desktop or something like that, it's actually running at a different profile. Okay, I think I have a flash drive here that I can go ahead and load this file in. So let me go ahead and see that. I love Doom as a benchmark. Yeah, Doom's actually a very good benchmark. The engine's also very, very consistent, very solid. So it's a solid option. Again, there's tons and tons of games that you can really use for the benchmark. It just really comes down to do you have the game, right? That's the always hard part, is like when you talk about people saying, hey, do you have this game? They might not be able to, and you can of course buy benchmark. You could get, you could buy UL benchmarks, right, where you can get stuff like 3D Mark. 3D Mark definitely would also work. I have a preference that I like to test in games. That's my personal preference, but 3D Mark for sure will work. So you can go ahead and use 3D Mark if you want. All right, let me go ahead and jump back in here. It sounds like AI could help. I'm not sure what you mean by AI in relation to what specific portion. There is already some advanced mechanisms that have been put in play to be able to kind of allow for more, let's say, automation, and that includes the OC scanner tool. So the OC scanner tool is an option that is now available that does give you some flexibility at being able to kind of like enable something, start the scanning, and then kind of walk away from it. But it is not, how would I say, there are still going to be aspects that you still have to go about. But it definitely has become a much simpler process. And NVIDIA does actually have this built into their software. So if you actually enable their performance overlay and you go into the tuning mode, it can actually do a little bit of kind of the behind the scenes, where it'll attempt to actually do an advanced, what's called VF curve scan, to try to figure out how much the card can overclock to and kind of program that information there for you. So right here, I'm essentially just installing a Sniper V2. This is a much older benchmark. It's a really cool game if you guys have never played Sniper. The newer versions also do have benchmarks. I don't think actually the latest one, though. I don't think Sniper 5 actually has a benchmark. But I think Sniper 3 and Sniper 4 both have benchmarks in them. Okay, so pretty much what you would do right here is you can see you've got your default mode, right? You're in standard, right? I made no changes. So right here, you could go ahead and do this. And you would load this. Now, the cool thing I like about this Sniper benchmark, right, is that Sniper does have essentially integrated within it. It has actually like a little output file. And so the output file is going to actually give you a little log file that you can immediately reference that'll actually include the frame reference information. So that actually will give you actually like FPS. And so you could actually compare that between kind of the default mode, and then you could compare that to the overclock mode. So you kind of can go back and forth between, hey, which one am I seeing a kind of performance benefit? Now, keep in mind, this is only one game engine. Generally, for your overclock, I would recommend running at least 3 game engines, and you should be able to consistently play into the game engine without any instability or any artifacts or any type of issues presenting themselves. If you had any instability in the overclock, you might see like little green lines or speckles of colors, or you might see different things kind of going on that would ultimately be affecting the performance and the overall stability. So if you saw that, or you just all of a sudden saw it to go like to a black screen or crash, that would let you know that essentially you've got instability. It was overclocked too much, and you would kind of need to maybe bring things back a little bit. But that's the cool thing about this very basic preset. This preset has a pretty high success rate in terms of being conservative enough that you should generally be able to do that. So you can see right here, we got 383 FPS, so it's pretty high FPS. And if I go over here, well, I'm trying to remember. I think it's in documents. Yeah. So right here, I can pull up this little log file. And I can see right here, I can see my average frame, minimum frame, and maximum frame, right? So that's kind of cool little data points right there. I can see then all the information right there, right? So it's all broken down to me, it's recorded. And then right here under my FPS, right, you can see 383. That was my average. My minimum was 39. And then my maximum was 721. Okay. And so now if we want to go ahead and switch over into the OC mode, we can go ahead and do that. And let me go see. And so we're going to go ahead and run that one more time. And we'll see. So somebody asked is the RGB box. Those are called the Hypercube. It's just a little little accessory that I've got right here as a cool little item that I've got just here for the desk setup right there. Yeah, so I think there's always interesting things. I think the cool thing is, with a lot of the work that NVIDIA is putting forth already into leveraging things with AI, as we're seeing, of course, with things like DLSS and DSR, of course, with RTX and so many other things. I wouldn't say it's out of the question to see, of course, more advanced machine learning and AI modeling come into many of the other things. And of course, from Asus' perspective, we have advanced machine level modeling that we've put into things like our overclocking technologies for our motherboards with things like Asus AIOC, right? So, definitely over the coming, years, I'm sure you'll continue to see advancements in this regard, right? Yeah, they are really cool. They also have a little app that you can go ahead and control the lighting even more specifically. You can wire multiple of them together. I have a second one that I haven't finished setting up. It's like right here. But when I maybe change up the room a little bit, we'll maybe have a little bit of a different setup. Okay, and so generally, like I said, because you can get variants, you want to probably run at least each one 3 times to be able to see enough. But we can already see we got a little bit of bump here, 387, right? So we saw right there, yeah, 383.4. So now we can go ahead and open this up. Documents, right? And I go to my second file. And this is the thing I like, at least about the way that this one works, is I can go ahead and just kind of do this like a little quick side by side. So we can see there 383, 387, right? And we also saw the minimum 39 to 57, and then the maximum 721 to 755, right? And this doesn't auto overclock the memory, but that gives you also flexibility that you could start to kind of know how to make a little bit of adjustment if you wanted to, or you could start to bump your values right here. Generally, I recommend being conservative. Don't probably go more than 25 megahertz increments at a time, approximately in that. Sometimes there are specific limitations based on the driver and the architecture for your graphics card, but those are just some quick tips. So that's just a quick tip on how you can easily overclock your graphics card using GPU Tweak 3. All right, so hopefully you guys found that useful. Cool little just feature that we have built in there. Even if you're taking a look at something like Afterburn doesn't have a easy kind of one-touch OC option. So I think it is a cool little option that we have. And in the future, like I said, we can definitely maybe look at some of the more advanced options that we have, like maybe the OC scanner, which is a much more kind of granular and in-depth way to be able to kind of do voltage frequency tuning, to be able to kind of even get maybe more margin out of kind of your overclocking. And again, you can always use that too as a starting point. So you could, have that adjustment there in that power target, have that adjustment in that megahertz. And then if you just want to see, hey, can I go a little bit more? You could just bump it a little bit more, bump a little bit more until you start to run into some instability. So what do you think, Jake? Are you going to try maybe the OC button on GPU Tweak?
Absolutely. It was one click and free FPS. And I want to highlight that, like, while you only gained 3 average FPS, the minimum actually jumped up quite a bit, and the maximum frame time actually dropped from 25 to 17, which is a pretty big difference. So
yeah, some of that's
not always about average.
Yeah, sometimes that can also be from like the initial caching. So that's the reason also why I always recommend that you run the benchmark at stock at least like 3 times, so that you have some kind of buffered runs, right? That kind of help to give you that consistency. And then same thing when you get into the overclock, if you rerun it at least 3 times, that gives you kind of a good kind of just, 3 different sets of data points that you can do compare and contrast, you can look at. And Jake nailed it right there, though. The good thing is don't just look at the average. You want to look at the entirety of those 3 points. And that's why, like I said, it's a great option that at least if you want something free that you can try out, great tool. But, Rebellion, the studio developer right there, they do also offer that benchmark tool in their game. So if you pick up a copy of Sniper, one, I think it's a fun game. I really love the zombie mode. It's really, really fun. But if you pick it up, they've got a built-in benchmark in the newer engine. But again, you can do what we're doing here with any number of games that have a built-in benchmark, right, to be able to give you that kind of before and after between stock and then your overclock configurations. All right. Well, I think that covers everything for me, Jake. I think that covers everything on your end, right? So why don't we go ahead and just give them that recap on where they can go ahead and find out about the latest and greatest when it comes to Asus graphics cards on our social handles?
Absolutely. Just feel free to follow us at Asus Graphics NA on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. We'll be kind of keeping regular updates there about some of the new content coming out. And then we'll have our streams every Thursday as well. Sometimes with a deep dive like we did today into some of this new features and tech, and always keeping you up to date on like availability and new product launches, etc. So feel free to check this out and stay tuned for more. Thanks for joining us today, guys.
Yep. And if you guys are not part of our Asus PCDIY group, make sure to go ahead and check it out. It is linked in the description down below. We'd love to have you there as part of our community of over 40,000 PCDIY enthusiasts. So with that, guys, take care, take it easy, enjoy the rest of your day, and see you next week. Bye-bye.
See you guys.